Hello, my loves. Continue to update new stories on Reddit, and don't forget if you like it, please subscribe and like it. Now let's start new stories. Story: Got rude guy arrested for suspended license. This story takes place about 20 years ago. In the mid-2000s, my friends and I would frequent a small billiards place in a neighboring town where you could rent a table by the hour or play per game. We'd play a few games, watch whatever sports were on TV, and have casual conversations. There were no problems and no drama until about 3 months of us visiting this place. A guy shows and takes our spot at the billiards table. No big deal. We were all chatting anyway. 20 minutes later, my friend lets him know we want to play next game, and the jerk is super dismissive. Needless to say, we didn't get in during the next game. So I politely let him know we wanted to play next. Another lady chimed in she wanted the game after us. The guy blatantly ignored me and the other woman. Some more time going by and the guy leave the table. We see our chance to get in. We put the quarters in and the balls are dispensed except the green 6 ball. The guy took it to the bathroom with him. At this point it was ridiculous and we notified the manager. The manager noted it was 12:30 and they were going to be calling last call and closing, so he didn't want to make a scene by kicking him out. He gets us another ball so we can play. The guy comes out of the bathroom and knows we realized what he did. He smirks and proceeds to the patio to have a cigarette, bringing along his beer and the green billiard ball. The guy comes back in and tossed the ball he was holding onto the table, hitting a few balls on the table and messing up our game. He goes up to the bar just in time for last call. One of the friends I was with suggested we follow him home and each call the highway patrol to report a suspected drunk driver. 3 of 4 of us agree. So when he leaves, we used our trusty Nextel push-to-talk phones and coordinated several calls to the police. We provided details like license plate, vehicle, make and model and color, and mentioned the car nearly hit another vehicle, was swerving between lines and driving erratically. This was under a 15-minute plan. We had no idea where the guy lived, but suspected it was close as he was visiting a neighborhood place, so our time was limited. The one guy who didn't notify the police tailed the jerk and called a skiddy when a police officer pulled between him and the guy and turned in his lights to pull him over. The police blotter that week included an arrested of a guy who was pulled over after multiple calls of erratic driving. He wasn't arrested for DWI, but instead for driving on a suspended license. Story: My landlord got not exactly what he deserved, but it sure was a rough ride for him. I had a landlord who was pretty absent. I lived in this building, a high-rise, like 20 stories, for 10 years. He, despite living next door to me, was absent and cold personally, but cool enough. Rent was good, our agreement was never bother him about anything unless it's an absolute emergency. Shower head wonky, go buy a new one. Fridge breaks, get it fixed, or dude, just buy a new one. Take it out of what you pay in rent. Lost the receipt, I don't care, I know more or less what a fridge costs, just take it out of rent. Finally his wife decides she wants more rent, wants to rent the place out as an office, not legal, and wants us out ASAP. I agree to move out a month early and get a month's rent back and deposit. Complete 180 on their part. The place is ruined, can't give you shit until you fix all this stuff. 2 main things: my cats did scratch up the leather legs of the dining table, and the pull-up bar made 2 dents in the doorframe of the kitchen, which was quite nice hardwood. They come to me with this list of tons of stuff like, oh, you hang a photo frame here, this tile is slightly chipped. This is the busiest work time of the year for me, but I'm trying to be cooperative. Sure, I got the table legs re-leathered, spackle the photo frame wall hole. Can't do anything about the door frame, take it out of deposit. Patch the tile. Like dozens of little everyday wear and tear things, like you want me to change the window screens. These are all new screens and in nicer shape than when I moved in. But I did them all, I trusted the guy. Gotta get my money at the end. He should have been giving me 24k RMB, 2,500 pounds. He gave me 5. I still need to use the money to fix all that stuff. If you can't accept the 5, I can't give you anything at all. I was super pissed off, but took the 5. Now, people in the building are gossipy. I don't participate, but I did tell this one older lady about my frustration. She told everyone. The wife went from being the star of the mommies group of the building to nobody wanting to talk to her. People shunned the guy, too. I originally told them I was planning on moving to another city, but an opportunity came up and I ended up renting a similar unit in the same building. So they thought they could just screw me over and not have to see me, but now they still did. Often. A year later the office calls me with some question about how to do something with the floor heating. I go, door frame is not fixed, still has dents. I call the guy like, what the hell, man, and he tells me to mind my own business. 5 years later, I see the light at my old place is still on at 3 a.m. Huh, that's odd. I go to check, the door is open, and the place is just trashed, ruined. Cabinets broken, stuff on the walls, lazy landlord, and the dents on the kitchen doorframe are still there. So the guy never fixed anything, just kept my money. By this time smartphones were popular and we had a chat group for the whole building, so about 500 people. I took pictures and posted everything. Apparently he had also nicked these people's deposit, and there was a huge ruckus when they trashed the place. Cops called. All these people chime in with complaints and pictures. People smoking in the hallways, leaving leaky rubbish outside the front door, videos of people using foul language in front of children, dirty footprints. He got fined a lot for 1. Creating a public disturbance, 2. Degrading the quality of the living space, 3. Illegally renting a residence as an office, and to top it off the building management wouldn't grant him permission to have workers in to fix the place, so it sat there empty for like 6 months. The fines were big, too. Take 1.5 months rent from me, lose a year's rent. Suck it, bro. Story: threaten my friend with revenge porn. I'll ruin your whole damn life. My very good friend made some slightly dumb mistakes and sent some pictures to someone that she reasonably thought she could trust, but not knowing much more than his first name, his screen name, and roughly where he lived and the type of work he did. He is not in our country, but had indicated that he would be traveling for work to near us shortly, and they had made some plans to meet. And when she got some red flags and backed out, the dude threatened to publish these pictures online. I am, incidentally, an attorney. So, some searching later, and gathering up any pictures he sent her of him that could possibly identify him, his online handle led me to a TikTok page, which led me to an Instagram page with his name on it. That led to a LinkedIn page with his place of work that matched a picture he sent with a branded polo he was wearing. Some more searched got me the email of the CEO, VP of HR, Operations Manager, and Public Relations Manager. I just fired off an email on behalf of my client of the screenshots of him threatening revenge porn, snippets of the conversation showing that username while he sent that exact picture of him wearing his company's branded apparel, links to how I know it's him, along with pictures he sent her of his motorcycle with the license plate showing, as further proof it is him. I also included screenshots of him discussing a workplace incident that were time-stamped, along with pieces of dialogue discussing how he had sex with an ex at his place of work, and discussing plans to have sex with her in his office as well. I also included a picture he sent her showing his work laptop with his entire Outlook calendar, along with proprietary information, which he sent to prove he was busy, along with other pictures he took of his workplace with non-consenting employees. I further informed his employer that I will be forwarding all this information to them, law enforcement, and since he had indicated that he would be traveling to the United States soon, will also forward this to the local office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation as, since my client is a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil, these threats constituted a federal crime. So that should they continue with his employment, and continue with their plans to send him to the United States for work, I will ensure, on behalf of my client, that federal law enforcement is waiting for him on arrival. Which I will do, as one of the assistant U.S. attorneys for this region is a law school buddy of mine. Since I have his license plate hashtag, I know where he lives, and will be contacting his local authorities tomorrow. You dumb motherfucker, thinking you were hiding around anonymity, thinking you could threaten my friend? It took me 45 minutes to destroy your life. Story: Landlord screwed with the wrong tenant for too long. Minor details might not be entirely accurate as I've no interest in a revival of this conflict on any level. I won completely, and any resurrection can only taint the experience. We'll start off by noting that I spent about 2 decades working in security. During that time I worked many different types of security in many different locations. The one that matters for this story was time spent in the rental housing tribunal in a major city as a kind of bailiff. For those not knowing what that is, think a courtroom, in a major city anyway. In a smaller town it'll probably be an event room in a hotel or community center, as you'd see on TV, but with less formality and an adjudicator instead of a judge. They functionally are the same thing to landlords and tenants, but they definitely aren't the same thing. This place exclusively deals with landlord and tenant disputes, and is the only place to resolve landlord and tenant disputes. Note that I wasn't a bailiff, and it wasn't a court, but these terms mostly accurately describe the situation and my place in it. For 2 years I worked at the rental housing tribunal. It was early in my time in security. I was 18 to 20-ish. Being as it was a major city, the sheer number of cases I sat through was beyond my ability to count. I saw everything there was to see. Noon is capable of surprising me with a story because I've seen them all. In detail, as a side duty of mine was to ensure all parties had copies of all evidence being presented. I did a lot of photocopying, and always inspected everything I copied to ensure nothing got cut off or made illegible. By the time I stopped working there I probably knew the way everything worked well enough to be an adjudicator myself. Well, no, obviously not, but I'm certainly in no need of a lawyer either should I ever have need to go there. I also had intimate knowledge of how the system worked beyond the actual rules. Like, for example, adjudicators would always give a little leeway to anyone representing themselves over someone who had a lawyer. Or how pissed off adjudicators would get when a party was speaking out of turn. Seriously, do not do that. Skip forward almost a decade. I left the city and am in a fairly large town in the same province, same tenant laws. I have a few roommates in a decently sized townhouse. We get along well. But there's a problem. Only I can write checks, and our paydays don't line up. So I'm the one who pays the rent, and I usually can't do it on the first because roommates don't usually all pay in time. We advise the landlord we might be a day or 2 late, but we'll always have it by the 3rd at the latest. They have no problem with it at all. I spoke to them myself. For about a year this works fine. No complaints from landlord because even if we're often a day or 2 late, we always pay. We're also fairly quiet and don't damage the property. Nearly model tenants. I do not actually have any idea why, but one day this changed. I suspect a different person in the company started overseeing the region. One day, suddenly we got a summons to the Rental Housing Tribunal, hereafter to be referred to as RHT, on the 2nd of the month for failure to pay rent. This doesn't actually lead to a case because we paid the same day. But now we have to pay the application fee the landlord paid in order to serve the summons. I bitched to the neighbor who was also the superintendent and eventually heard back that their contact at the company was now demanding first of the month no exceptions. Well, that really didn't work for us, so we probably had to pay that fee 15 to 20 times over the next 2 years. I could have gone to tribunal over it, but we were technically without a leg to stand on and I knew it. Maybe if I went enough times I can ding them for harassment, but I don't have time for that and my roommates don't care. After being split between us, all the fee wasn't enough deterrent to change our behavior, so we accepted it. If this was the only issue, there wouldn't be much story though. At around the same time, the rent leeway vanished, so did mandatory maintenance. I'm not going to list everything that went wrong and wasn't fixed. You'll get a decent idea at the end. We suffered through it. We were all working too many hours at shit pay to be able to actually do anything about it. We adapted. But after about 2 years it broke. Everyone but me up and moved out for various reasons within a 4-month period. I'm not going into any details on my roommates at all because things kinda exploded for a couple different reasons outside of this. No reason to dig any of that up. I had been saving up a while and was able to quit my job without having to immediately get another, so I suddenly had a lot of time. I didn't want to stay and pay the rent by myself or have to find new roommates I could live with, and with my experience in the RHT, I knew I had the landlord by the balls. So I went for them. I stopped paying rent. Annoyingly, I didn't get a summons the first month. But I did the second. So I went. With a meticulously documented plethora of evidence of failure to maintain the property and entering the property without formal notice. I had a copy for the landlord and a copy for the adjudicator. I know from experience that technically you're supposed to give the other party the evidence before the tribunal, but I also knew about that leeway an adjudicator gives to those who represent themselves. So I didn't give the landlord the evidence until our case came up, 100% total ambush. They argued they were ambushed, but the adjudicator just dismissed the case, dressed me down a little, and told me to file my own summons as I should have done. This was the petty revenge. The landlord and lawyer drove 3 hours to get there, for nothing. Worse than nothing. I filed my own summons, and the big day shows up. It's been about 4 months of me not paying rent at this point. I'm prepared to if I lose, but I don't think I'm going to lose. The whole thing could not have gone better. I had 20 to 30 pages of evidence and 20-odd photographs. They had nothing. They had no actual defense for our water heater being out for 6 months or us not having a fridge for a year, just to mention 2 severe issues. Their entire defense rested on us being late for rent, which actually worked against them once. That led to the adjudicator learning how many times we'd paid the application fee, and lies that had no evidence to support them. They even talked over me a few times, and I saw in his eyes the one time I opened my mouth to protest during their turn to speak but forced myself to shut up with every gram of willpower I had, so only a squeak came out. The adjudicator respected me. He had no respect for the landlord. I had one on every possible front. The only question was how much. It was more than I'd ever seen. I got 9 months of free rent, and the landlord was ordered to have everything fixed before the next month was over or I'd get more. I gave notice I was leaving at the end of the 8th month and left at the end of the 9th. Because the landlord had never renewed the lease, I didn't have to give him the 3-month notice the lease specified. If you want a figure to put to it, I basically got a $13,000 judgment in my favor, adjusted for inflation and rounded. I also made the landlord and lawyer drive 3 hours, twice, only to lose. The landlord's face was so red at the end, I thought he'd have a heart attack. He didn't though. By Mart. Story, Stick Me with Hidden Charges I'll Show You. So this past Christmas, my missus and I purchased one of our 9-year-old son's Santa gifts from a certain UK sports retail company that also have many stores here in Ireland as well. It was a football rebounder, kinda like a trampoline that you kick the ball at and it bounces back to you. Anyway, we purchased it from their Irish website and thought nothing more of it. A few days go by and we get a notification from a certain brown uniformed courier company that there are customs charges due on something. And as you can imagine, we bought many things for the kids, so we had to double check what we've ordered, and we didn't have anything left that was being imported, so we naturally assumed it was a scam. So I told the wife to call the company and find out who shipped it, and it was a different courier company based in the UK. After a bit of digging and investigating, it turns out that it's our rebounder. They had shipped it from the UK, via a local carrier, to the brown uniformed guys to deliver to us. Now, my wife and I are both on disability, so an additional charge of almost €50 when you're both already on a fixed income is harsh, especially at Christmas, so I told her to pay it and I'd deal with the retailer. The first day I called, I had to call 3 times, being stuck on hold for at least 20 minutes each time, but I was patient and polite because I've worked in a call center before, so I knew those people are only doing their job. But I asked to speak to a manager and was promised a call back each time. That never happened. The second day was quite similar. The third day I was starting to get annoyed, so called back, waiting even longer on hold, and finally wasn't taking this shit any longer. I told the rep that all I wanted was the €50 back because our consumer rights in Ireland dictate that a person must be informed of any additional charges on a purchase, at the very latest, by the final checkout screen, and in this case there was nothing to show that, and I could easily replicate that issue by putting the same item in my basket and going all the way to the checkout screen again, and there was nothing saying we'd have to pay import charges. The rep was indifferent to the situation but tried to help, and what he said sent me over the edge. He offered me a measly €20 gift voucher to use on their website, but more importantly he read a statement to me. He said we advise our customers that there may be charges, delivery duty, unpaid customs charges on any item that gets shipped outside of the UK. Then I asked him where it states this information and he paused, then said he didn't actually know. I said, well, I know one thing. It doesn't say it anywhere on this transaction because I've checked, and because this is a violation of my consumer rights, I'm going to give your company one last chance to make this right. Have your manager call me within the next 60 minutes, or I'm going to post this entire debacle on LinkedIn and link every senior officer in your company. Then I hung up the phone and waited. Yet again, no call. The next day I went on LinkedIn and followed through on my promise. I created a post detailing what they had done by sticking us with hidden charges and that they were ignoring our requests for a manager and everything they said and did. Then I tagged every senior officer at that company from the regional managers, through the European directors, all the way to the CEO, and I shamed them for how they operate their company. This, ladies and gentlemen, was now an act of war. Shortly after I posted that, I noticed that they took down the item from their website in an attempt to hide this, but they must have thought I'm a simpleton that doesn't understand how the internet works. They didn't realize that when you searched for rebounder on their site, that it shows the item in question, so I took a screenshot of that, then another of the item page that was now missing, but then I did a Google cached search for the same page and found a version from 2 days prior happily showing the item. Then I added a comment to my original post highlighting how they were trying to hide it, with the evidence, and trolling them for their heinous behavior, especially at Christmas. Then I tagged and shamed all the senior officers again, and at this point it was really starting to get some attention, not only publicly, but 3 people in incognito mode viewed my profile. I wonder who they could have been. So naturally I took a screenshot of the 3 mysterious visitors listed on my profile and did the same thing. Commented on my own post highlighting it and trolling them for their incompetence. The next morning I got a call from a senior exec at their head office in the UK, practically licking my boots with apologies, asking what she can do to make this right. I told her I originally only wanted my €50 back as it wasn't fair, nor even legal, that I had to pay it. But since I had to go to such lengths to get their attend tie-in, now I wanted my €50 back, a full refund on my entire purchase, and I wanted to keep the product. That was the only thing that would make this go away. She asked for a couple of hours to fix it and I said okay. About an hour later I got another call from her again apologizing. She asked for my PayPal address where she sent the €50, then she refunded the whole purchase, and she let us keep the product. Obviously, I thanked her for her help because at that stage I was just happy it was over, but I'll be fucked if I'll let anyone walk all over my family, even if they are a £58 million annual company. The most of the story here is, don't take bullshit from anyone. I may be just one man, but my son's view of Santa is far more valuable to me than the opinion of some retail chain that doesn't care about its customers nor how it operates ethically. Story: Stepdad cheats on my mom, so we get revenge. Me, 24-year-old, my mother, 50-year-old, my brother, 23-year-old, my sister, 30-year-old, cheating stepdad, 45-year-old, Chris stepdad's coworker, 25-year-old, Betty. The other woman, 40-year-old, Darla. This may be a long one, apologies in advance. I moved in with my mom after her marriage of 25 years with my bio dad was ended. He was a manipulative asshole, but that's another story. Shortly after the divorce, my mom introduced me to her boyfriend at the time, Chris. Now, my mom worked as a corrections officer at the county jail. The boyfriend was a former inmate, in for a DUI. That should have been the first red flag, But my mom was grieving a long marriage, and I didn't want to push the subject. Chris seemed to make her happy, and that was enough for me. Me, bro and sis all moved in with mom and Chris, and we seemed to get along okay. Chris and I bonded a bit over our love of video games, and all seemed well. That is, until 2017. Due to Chris's prior DUI, he had to go in regularly for probationary checkups at the courthouse. One day, he didn't return, and we got a little worried. We then received a phone call from him, from Texas. Turns out, when he arrived at the courthouse that day, he was jumped by the FBI. His family from Texas was implicated on a number of gang and drug-related crimes, and due to a situation where he was in a vehicle during a drug handoff, he was on the hook as well. He ended up agreeing to testify against his family members in exchange for a shorter sentence, and allowed to be out of prison before the trial. My mom was distraught, and over the course of many phone calls over a year, they worked out their marriage plans when he returned. His store owner at the DQ he worked at allowed him to come back as well, back to his store manager position. Soon after, the drinking started. Now obviously, because of his DUI, Chris was clearly no stranger to drinking. He began to drink more and more, to the point where he was consuming half a 24-pack of beer a day. Chris was a mean drunk. He regularly started fights when wasted, and while they never got physical, he wasn't exactly kind with his words. My mom enabled his behavior for several years, saying the stress was getting to him from work and from the upcoming trial. Finally, after several years, my mom had enough. Chris came home extremely drunk one night, and my mom confronted him. She asked if he'd been drinking, and when he didn't deny it, she kicked him out. He went to live with a friend temporarily. The next morning, Mom asked us to help gather a few of his essentials so that he didn't have to re-enter the home until he was sober. While we were gathering his things, we heard a knock at the front door. We opened it to find Betty, one of Chris's coworkers and someone I went to high school with. She told my mom she had something important to share. After sitting my mom down and telling her not to share where she got the info from, Betty told my mom about how Chris was cheating on my mom with Darla. How he regularly had Darla perform sexual acts in and around his workplace. How Betty had caught them, and how Chris told her that if she ever told my mom, he'd fire her. He was the store manager. And finally, how Darla was pregnant. My mom was angry. After the initial shock wore off, she told us to round up all of Chris's things, and to dump it outside. We took everything of his out of the house and tossed it all in the alley behind our house. Chris had no reason or ability to return to the house. It was rented, with only my mom on the paperwork, so no issues there. In the meantime, she called and confronted him. He confessed to the entire affair, and that he was happy Darla was pregnant because that meant he'd finally have a child of his own. Mom refused to have more kids. We three were massive strains on her body. She likely wouldn't survive anymore. He refused to apologize for any of his actions. My mom arranged for him to collect his items from the alley, with an officer present, and he left our lives. Now, my mom clearly wanted to dust her hands of him and move on. She was already quite emotional from the whole ordeal, and wanted nothing more from him. But sis, bro, and I had other ideas. First, we called his workplace. DQ operates as an independently owned franchise, and the owner of this branch owned several branches in the area. He was also a good friend. We informed him of the sexual acts being performed on the premises, and he went through the processes of getting Chris booted from his position, and barred him from any of the branches in the area. Funnily, Betty got his position after he left, and now runs a tight and clean ship. Chris no longer had a job or a place to live, and so went to live with Darla in a town about an hour away. We found out that he started working at another DQ in that town, and informed the owner of that location of the situation. It took significantly longer, due to there being no current and decent actions occurring there, but eventually he lost that job too. Soon after, Chris began driving around our neighborhood, seemingly stalking my mom and our family, probably because of his job loss. Now, due to the whole situation in Texas, he never had his probation lifted for his DUI, and thus still did not have a license. He never had to drive when he lived with us, since work was local and we could drive him as needed. But here was clearly driving around by himself when he shouldn't be. We contacted the police and informed them about Darla's vehicle in our neighborhood, and that we believed Chris was driving it, without a license. We told them to pull over the vehicle next time they see it, as it would likely be seen driving again. Sure enough, a few weeks later, we were told that Chris indeed was pulled over, and sent back to the local jail for driving without a license, and while intoxicated. The police also did a search of the home he was staying at, and found several guns at the premises. Since he was a felon, he was not legally allowed to have weaponry on the premises, meaning there was more jail time tacked on. By the time his jail time had finished, it was just in time for him to be sent back to incarceration in Texas for the trial. Chris's son was born while Chris was in prison. Darla evidently realized what an absolute ass Chris was, and cut ties with him while he was in prison. During his prison time, Chris started sending tons of letters to my mom, stating how sorry he was, pleading to take him back, and ranting about how it wasn't his fault, all in the same letter, mind you. Mom burnt every one of them. We moved on, moving out of state. Chris evidently got out of prison some years ago, and now lives in Kansas, struggling and fighting child support, which Darla sued him for. Mom now has a new boyfriend, who treats her right and cares a lot more than Chris ever did. Bro and sis moved on and out, and I still live with Mom, assisting her with the newly purchased home that we've been renovating. Lives looking okay. I was reminded of this by a chat with a coworker about cheaters, and thought to post it here for others to enjoy. Story: deliberately deplete my prepaid phone balance, you will pay for it 1,000 times over. I went to middle school in the early 2010s, right before smartphones really took off. I got my first phone right before starting 6th grade. It was a slide phone with a pay-as-you-go plan that cost 10 cents per minute for calls and per text message sent or received. Worse yet, sending or receiving photos cost 25 cents each. It was very expensive, and my parents only gave me $100 a year for this. If I exceeded the amount, I had to cover the rest with my limited birthday and Christmas money I had. Fortunately, most of my friends were good about helping me preserve the balance. They would call and I'd let the call drop but immediately call back on a landline so it wouldn't count as a call, and they'd email me or message me on Skype for most things. Everything was good until Derek joined the group in 7th grade. At first we thought he was funny, but we quickly got fed up with him as he was very unpleasant and exhibited many antisocial behaviors. He started drama within the friend group and also caused issues between us and other kids outside of the group. He was manipulative and always played the victim when others rightfully called him out on his shit, and he knew how to charm parents, so getting rid of him was easier said than done. He was the one friend who didn't respect my phone situation. He very frequently texted me dumb memes, even though I told him multiple times to just email or Skype them to me instead since picture text messages cost 25 cents each. Unfortunately, blocking phone numbers was a feature that was unavailable for this pay-as-you-go plan, so there was nothing I could do as he spammed my phone. One day he got mad at me for some reason and spammed my phone with memes. He must have sent me over 100 lolcats over text. He kept sending them until I lost service since my phone balance was depleted. I had lost the $40 remaining in my account as a result. I was extremely pissed and demanded that he pay me the $40 he had cost me, and he refused and said it wasn't his problem. I got home from school really upset and told my dad about the situation, expecting him to go and tear Derek's mother a new one and demand the money, but my dad said that it wasn't worth the battle. I even asked him about a small claims court, but he said that not all battles are worth fighting, and that the effort wasn't worth $40. He took me to the carrier's store and loaded $50 onto the phone. The carrier changed my phone number, and they managed to block Derek's number. They had initially said that blocking phone numbers wasn't possible with this plan, but my dad insisted and would not leave the store until they did it. I was extremely paranoid about my phone number being leaked and other kids spamming it to fuck with me. Fortunately, my parents got iPhones that summer and got me one too, and the new family plan had an unlimited text plan. Nonetheless, I was pissed at the $40 he essentially stole from me out of malice. Fortunately, not too long after, there was a big blowout between Derek and the rest of the friend group at the end of the school year, and we permanently kicked him out of the group. He was an outcast the following year in 8th grade. Nobody was tolerating his shit anymore, and he changed schools the year after and we never heard from him again. Fast forward to a few years ago, I was back home for a few months between graduating college and starting a new job on the other side of the country. I went out to some garage sales one Saturday morning and I ended up at Derek's house. I recognized his mother, but I don't think she recognized me. I guess glasses and a beard is all you need. I noticed some Pokemon napkins out for sale, and when I picked them up to look at them, Derek's mom said that her son had been obsessed with Pokemon for his whole life and that she was tired of Pokemon stuff occupying her home for so many years. I said that these napkins were for my younger cousin who is really into Pokemon, and asked if she had any more Pokemon stuff. She said she didn't know people were still into that and that there were a few boxes in the attic with her son's old stuff. She actually took me inside the house, which I never imagined I'd set foot inside ever again, and let me climb up the attic ladder and take down several large boxes to look through. The first one had Christmas ornaments in it and other junk, but I freaked out inside when she opened a box jam-packed with Pokemon video games in the original boxes, though I kept my cool on the outside. The whole reason I had agreed to go inside in the first place was because I was holding out hope of this exact scenario happening. See, I knew Derek was obsessed with Pokemon. Our friend group liked Pokemon back in the day even when other kids thought it wasn't cool, but Derek was on a whole different level. He bragged about his Pokemon collection all the time. At the time he had every single main series game in the original box, and in mint condition as he always had to add in. I went to his house once and he was showing me his collection. He yelled at me for touching one of the games. Nobody was allowed to touch them except him. He had many older Nintendo games in excellent condition, but Pokemon was his favorite. He had had a couple of incidents with his mom damaging or throwing away his things. It wasn't out of malice, but just ignorance, as she didn't think the games or collectibles had any value. Fast forward into the present day, I was thinking about this when I asked his mother if she had any other Pokemon stuff. She ended up bringing out the motherlode. We opened all of the boxes she had me bring down. Within the boxes there was the beloved collection of Pokemon games, all very well preserved, as well as several Nintendo consoles, hundreds of games, 24 binders full of Pokemon cards, and there was also a box of many Lego sets with the original boxes and everything, with many old Star Wars sets. When I saw Django Fett I knew I struck gold. I told her that I liked old Legos as well, and asked her how much for the 5 boxes of games, cards, and Lego sets, and she thought for a second and said $100 a box, or $400 for all 5. I told her I would take it all and hauled ass to get to an ATM. I loaded the 5 boxes into my dad's truck and immediately drove home. I knew there was potentially tens of thousands of dollars of goods here. This was the score of a lifetime and I finally felt vindicated for the $40 Derek had taken from me all those years ago. I ended up giving all the stuff to my uncle, who's a hobbyist eBay reseller. He offered to sell it all. He was willing to go through the effort and sell everything individually, and despite my insistence he said he wouldn't take more than a 10% cut of the profits after all fees and taxes. We went through and logged every single item along with the estimated value, and the total of the whole lot was about $40,000. 40,000 was a poetic number since this was 1,000x the value of what Derek stole from me all those years ago. My uncle sold most of the lot before the end of the summer and ended up writing me a check. Though it was considerably less than $40,000, it was still a life-changing amount of money for me. I was able to pay off my remaining student loans and put the rest towards a down payment on a new car. Story: Boss from Hell gets what she deserves. I, a 30-year-old, have been a people pleaser to a fault my whole life. I have been working in marketing for 10+ years. Over the years, I've had my fair share of bosses who were good, average, and some who sucked. There is one in particular that stood out as awful. This story is from about 5+ years ago. Pamela, 40-year-old, not real name, was the VP of Marketing and Sales for a mid-size retailer. She started at the company a few years after I did. And if rumors were true, she was the fourth pick for the position and was simply hired so the company could appease shareholders. I was a manager under her, and my whole job was to make sure the website and stores had their products merchandised properly, received all their monthly sales materials, managed advertising, set up and managed the department's budget, PM'd all department projects and operations, created reporting to reflect sales, managed presentations, creative briefs for future projects, etc. In short, I did her work and all the administrative grunt work to keep the department afloat. I managed all this because I had access to her email and many times sent emails on her behalf to keep the department functioning. Pamela spent most of her time showing up after 10 a.m., taking business lunches, and planning company parties. Don't even know why we did those, but I planned those too. I consistently questioned why she spent so much of our budget on these events when we didn't have the budget resources for any of it. Pamela told me to take from future months' budgets to pay for the current month's overspending. So, at the start of every month, I had an original budget, and by the end of the month, I had to turn in an edited budget edited under Pamela's direction that made it look like Pamela's spending was under control. This is important for later. I definitely made mistakes here and there being in charge of so many tasks and constantly found myself working 12-hour days split between being in the office and working after my kid went to bed. Weekend work was also done before my family woke up and after they went to bed. During Pamela's first major holiday season, sales were shit. Pamela kept changing her mind on the visuals for the stores, kept bringing on new advertising and PR agencies to bring in sales. All these agencies consisted of her personal friends, and ignored our buying merchandise team's planned promotions for her own better ones. At this time, I had been dealing with an ongoing infection that turned to sepsis and was hospitalized. The doctors and my husband said it was due to the stress of work and that I needed to take a break. As I recovered, I realized how much I was hurting myself, my family, and even the company I worked for. Eventually, my old habits got to me, and I got on my phone and checked mine and my boss's emails. What I found made my blood boil. First, I got a lovely bouquet of flowers from upper management wishing me well, and I knew that Pamela organized the delivery. She sent me her favorite flowers. I went to her inbox to put the receipt in the correct folder to send to accounting when I got back. At the top of her inbox from the past 3 days were emails clearly not related to business. What I found in her emails was Pamela emailing her personal friends griping on how I can't just shake off sepsis and get back to work. She also complained that she couldn't find any of my notes, spreadsheets, or documents for any of the work she was technically in charge of. They were on our shared drive labeled very clearly. Finally, I found an email where she sent a friend from a previous company asking for advice on how to bring in sales and save her job. In this long thread, this old colleague asked if there was anyone managing most of the work, and of course, Pamela said I was. This colleague explained that clearly it was my mismanagement that was causing issues and that I could be blamed if sales didn't pull through by the end of the season. Pamela mentioned that I was in the hospital and repeated comments from her other email thread. This person said that she couldn't outright fire me because it could seem like retaliation because I needed to take emergency medical leave. But, if Pamela could prove I was stealing from the company or misusing company resources, then she would have grounds to have me fired and use me as a scapegoat. Upon my return, Pamela called me into her office and said she was worried I was taking on too much and wanted to take work off my plate. She announced was taking managing the department budget off my plate. She asked me to only drop of a small stack of invoices to accounting. Additionally, Pamela told me under no circumstances was I allowed to talk to accounting about anything regarding budgets. Also, if I had any concerns about the department or workload, I wasn't allowed to go to HR, I had to discuss it directly with Pamela. Oh yeah, I could see where this was going. Unfortunately for Pamela, I had built a rapport with Lois, 50-year-old not real name, who was our main accountant. Lois always said that she would do everything in her power to help me should I ask. Knowing this, I grabbed the stack of invoices off Pamela's desk to give to accounting. I also added the email threads I read while I was in the hospital, and the current unedited budget that Pamela hadn't touched yet for the month. I also found in my filing cabinet the hard copies of old budgets with Pamela's handwriting on what numbers to change to balance our budget. Finally, I added an email from our first round of budget adjustments where Pamela's subtlety threatened to put someone else in my job if I couldn't do what she asked. So, I walked and dropped off the invoices to accounting when I bumped into Lois. She brought up invoices, and I sternly looked at her and said Pamela is the only one in our department that Lois is allowed to talk to about our budget and invoices. Lois saw the suspiciously thick file folder on her desk, gave a firm nod, and lovingly kicked me out of her office. Within the week, Pamela was fired. From what I understand, she has been continually job hopping for the past few years. The CEO and HR brought me in to personally apologize for everything I went through and gave me a paid 1-week vacation to take at my discretion. Given other issues with this business, I left after another year. Which brings me to today. I am, once again, a manager for sales and marketing. I have a wonderful boss, Mike, 40-year-old, who trusts my business decisions and backs me up on practically everything. We are hiring my team for me to solely manage and direct. Today, I looked through the applicants and found Pamela's resume sitting among dozens of others. I stared at her name, wondering how many other people share her name. Upon review, yup, it's her. She definitely fell down the corporate ladder, with VP of our old company being the highest title she earned. And, to no surprise, she embellished her achievements, claiming the work I managed as her own, and claimed she generated an 87% sales growth during the holiday season at our previous company. As a people pleaser, who firmly believes in giving everyone a chance, it has never been so satisfying to click disqualified. Story: Revenge on a client who tried to throw me under the bus. I was pushing 40, and I'd learned a lot of lessons in more than 10 years of legal practice. But one of the most important lessons I learned was from an older lawyer that I worked for as a summer student, after the second year of law school. A lawyer has 3 duties, he told me: first to himself, second to the court, and last, the client. Always make sure you come first, and the client comes last. The reason? Because clients will fuck you, he said, they'll throw you under the bus without thinking twice. I should have stayed with this lawyer, but being young and an idiot, I had to go work downtown, and I'm still downtown now, but fortunately for me, I remembered this lesson, and it came in handy many years later when a client really did try to throw me under the bus. My client was this mid-sized company that did this and that and owned things here and there, not big enough to be listed, but it did have a pretty sizable real estate portfolio, and one day a building they owned burned to the ground. The company wanted to collect on the insurance, so they told Frank, a veteran salaryman, to deal with it. Frank was close to 60 and thought he knew what he was doing. He didn't need me to help him with the insurance claim, he told me, he had everything under control. Besides, lawyers are expensive. Some guys really get off on not paying legal fees, and Frank was one of those guys who gloated over every penny that he managed not to pay to the lawyers. I dealt with Frank a lot, and he was always nickel and diming me. The insurer is going to fuck you, I told Frank. It was only by luck that I even knew about the fire and the loss because Frank had not asked for my help, he'd just let it slip one day, and since then, I'd kept on top of him, trying to get him to smarten up. I'd had to fight to get him to send me the proof of loss form to make sure he hadn't messed that up. Frank fucked up a lot, and I wondered sometimes how he had a job. But the proof of loss was okay, at least, so that was one less thing to worry about. You don't know that, he said. I could tell he just wanted to get me off the phone. I'm paid to know when insurers are trying to screw my clients, I said, and the insurer is going to screw you. They've been stringing you along for ages with requests and questions and paperwork, but they aren't going to pay you. Not unless you sue them. But Frank said he knew what he was doing, that it was all under control, and besides, he got along with the adjuster so great. The limitation period expires in 2 weeks, I said, and once that 2 weeks pass, it will be too late to sue. The moment that limitation period expires, they will stop taking your calls. You'll get a final email saying sorry, you're out of time, and that will be that. Don't leave this till the last minute. Let me sue right now, and you'll have the money in no time. Frank was like, sure, fine, whatever, don't bother me, I got this, blah blah blah, and he got off the phone as soon as he could. I sent him the usual email with clear warnings and recommendations, which he ignored. I sent the email again, and then again as the limitation period approached, and again a couple of days before the deadline. I'm going to be at trial, and you won't be able to reach me, my final email said, but you have to sue. You have other firms on your list, so pick one and sue. He didn't bother to reply, and I went off to do my trial. The trial lasted a couple of weeks, and no email from Frank. Then a month passed, and another month, still no email. I figured he must have sorted things out. Maybe Frank was right after all, I said to myself, and then my phone rang. It was Frank. Remember that fire insurance thing we spoke about? We'd only spoken about it like a dozen times. I figured he was calling up to gloat, so I cut to the chase. So they paid out. That's great, Frank. You were right. He asked me what I was talking about, and could he see a copy of the claim? What claim? I said. The claim against the insurer. You know, that claim. Does that mean the insurer didn't pay? I said. He hung up on me, and then a few minutes later, my computer dinged, and there was Frank's email, talking about how we spoke, and he told me to sue, and he was worried when I hadn't sent him a copy of the claim, so he was following up to get a copy of the claim. I emailed him back. I take it that the insurer didn't pay you, just like I told you they wouldn't, and now that the limitation period is expired, they told you to jump in the lake, leaving you with a loss in the millions. Is that it? I'd made a mistake by not going over Frank's head when he wouldn't listen to me, but if I'd gone over Frank's head, I never would have received another file from him, so I didn't. But that was then, and this was now, so I carbon copy Frank's boss and his boss's boss, plus I carbon copy Bill, the client's in-house counsel. Bill acknowledged my email right away later that day. Frank messed up, he said, we know that. He's an idiot. So what do we do? So his excuses didn't work? Nope. Bill explained that they'd summoned Frank to a boardroom, but his story didn't add up, given all the warnings I'd sent him. Besides, there would have been no reason for him to keep emailing the insurer if he'd told me to sue. Once the file goes to legal counsel, Frank's role was over. The company knew Frank was bullshitting them. So that's it, then? Bill said, we just lost a couple of $1,000,000? It's okay, I said, explaining that when I realized that Frank was going to fuck up, I issued a claim against the insurer. Because I'd made Frank send me the proof of loss a while earlier, I had enough information that I could sue to preserve the cause of action. Not a great claim and short on details, but good enough. You sued without instructions? Bill said. Lawyers aren't supposed to sue without instructions because if you do that, you're personally liable for whatever costs the other side incurs. It's a big deal to sue without instructions. Yup, I said, I sued without instructions. I pulled up a copy of the claim and emailed it to him as we spoke. It's a little rough, I said, but we can always amend. Thank God. Bill said, can I leave it with you? Of course he could. The insurer was a sitting duck, and I knew I'd collect from them, no problem. A few days later, I got a call from another guy who worked for the client, a guy I didn't normally deal with. They had a situation and needed my help. I usually deal with Frank, I said, what's up? What was up was that Frank got called into another meeting, and they handed him a one-page letter, and then he put his little office things in a box, and security walked him past his coworkers to the elevator and escorted him downstairs to the parking lot. Bye-bye, Frank. He was too old to get another job, or at least, not a decent one. It was a life-changing event for Frank, But for me, he was just an anecdote, a cautionary tale that I tell young lawyers sometimes over beers, maybe too often, because I'm getting on in years and I have my favorite stories. I wasn't trying to get revenge on Frank, not at all, and I would have felt a bit sorry for him if he hadn't been trying to throw me under the bus. But the guy who replaced him was great and never nickel and dimed me, so it was all good. Story: a lawyer's pro-revenge on his boss. This opinion is shit, my boss told me. He'd been a lawyer for 3 years, and the firm assigned me to him for training, to show me, junior counsel, how to be a litigator. I disliked my boss for a number of reasons. He knew no law, and he expressed himself badly in writing. For a litigator, that's like strike 1 and 2 right there, and strike 3 was this: he had no balls. He was actually scared of going to court. I noticed this when he took me to assignment court one day, and when it was his turn to speak his hands were shaking. He was scared, in fucking assignment court, where all you do is set a trial date. What's wrong with what I wrote? I said. Not what I asked for, he said, turning away. But when I checked the memo he'd emailed me 2 weeks earlier, I saw that the opinion I wrote was exactly what he asked for. I knew what was up. He was going to delete my dockets for writing the memo and then claim he did it himself, thus leaving quite a bit short of my docketing quota for the month. I knew that he would do this to me because he'd done this before. I knew that my memo would wind up on a partner's desk without my name on it. I knew that for a fact, because the firm I worked at was one of the first in the city to have a really good internal network. We were using email for internal communications before the internet became a thing. So the firm was way ahead in terms of technology, but not in terms of security, and not long after I joined the firm I learned how to surf away on the firm's hard drive and find interesting things, like evidence that my boss was plagiarizing my work. My boss was the very model of the young downtown lawyer. His perfect shoes always gleamed. He wore bespoke suits because he came from money. Everyone just took it for granted that he was on the partner track. I, on the other hand, was well on my way to nowhere special, so maybe he thought it was okay to fuck with me. If so, that was a big mistake on his part. I didn't like having my billable hours fucked with. I seriously resented it, because I was already being targeted as one of the juniors who doesn't docket as much as he should, and I was getting pushback from the partner who headed our team. I told the partner what was going on, but he didn't care. It was like being back in middle school and showing up in the office with bruises on my face and the principal saying boys will be boys and sending me on my way. You'll just have to work harder, or smarter, the partner said when I reported the latest bullshit thing my boss did to me. I couldn't work harder, I was doing the usual 6 days a week lawyers downtown are forced to do, but I could work smarter, and that night I thought up a plan. Christmas was coming, and I thought I'd give my boss a little present. It landed on his desk on December 24th, in the form of a memo purporting to be from the partner that my boss reported to. The partner was an old guy, and not really on board with emails and computers, so he did everything old school, on paper. So when my boss came in on December 24th and saw a memo on his desk from the partner with a legal research assignment, that wasn't unusual. The memo was drafted in the usual form that the partner used, because of course I had taken great pains to make sure that it looked authentic. My boss walked over to the little cubicles where the juniors worked and gave me the same memo. Except his secretary had retyped it, so now the assignment was from him to me, instead of from the partner to my boss. The assignment was difficult, requiring me to do a deep dive into admiralty law, its relationship to the common law, combined with a constitutional division of powers question. But this is a huge assignment, I whined, and I'm going to be away. Can't you get someone else to do it? Is it really urgent? The memo I'd forged to my boss stressed how totally urgent the situation was, but there was no way my boss could double-check with the partner, because the partner left the day before on vacation. That's why I'd waited until December 24th. No can do, my boss said, this is a big deal. Just let HR know. Maybe they'll give you time and half or something. He turned his back and walked away, thinking he had ruined my holidays. But he was mistaken. You see, I'd written a paper for a third-year course that was basically the same thing as the research assignment in the memo. So the only work I had to do was to find the old floppy disk with the draft on it, fiddle with it a bit, and voila, a very detailed and very long memo on an obscure point of Admiralty law, with references starting back to Lord Coke's day. So I put the memo together and took my holidays as planned. I wasn't traveling anywhere, because I had no money, but I saw my family and stayed in town, and I made a point of dropping by the office during the holidays, sending an email or two, establishing that I was around, and docketing all my time for the huge amount of research I was allegedly doing. So the holidays end, and I'm sitting in my shitty little cubicle with a huge stack of work to do, and my boss comes up to me, in one of his bespoke suits with a gold tie pin and cufflinks to match. He was wearing a gold watch, too. He was dressed up, even for him, trying to make an impression of some kind. "Where's that memo? You were supposed to have it on my desk when I got back." "I'm going into a meeting at noon." "Just finished it this morning," I said, handing him the lengthy memo that was still warm from the printer. My boss took the memo in his hands and felt its heft, and he smiled. Then he turned and walked away without a word. Just before lunch, I heard a commotion down the hall. It was a pretty loud commotion, as such things go, a loud fuck, and then a door was flung open. It was the partner, and he was screaming for my boss to get his ass into his office, now, right now, as in immediately. I had the pleasure of watching my boss scramble down the hall. "Just what the fucking fuck is this?" the partner said, standing in the doorway to his office, and holding my handiwork at arm's length with his thumb and index finger, as if he were afraid that handling it would soil him. My boss mumbled something, and then the partner ushered him inside. I heard more shouting, then the sound of muffled excuses, and then more shouting from the partner. Then the door flung open again. "Called in the 90s. "Get your ass in here, too," the partner said, and I got my ass in there pronto. "Did you write this fucking memo?" the partner said. I took it from him and looked it over. "I wrote it. The cover page has been changed to remove my name, but other than that, it's mine. I spent all Christmas on it. Is there something wrong with it?" The partner exploded. "Is there something wrong with it? Something wrong? I'll tell you what's wrong with it. It's fucking useless. Totally useless." I explained that I'd followed my boss's instructions to the letter, and that I'd docketed more than 100 hours on it. At this, the partner really went nuts, and told me to go back to my desk and fetch him the memo from my boss. I brought it to him, and when he read it, his face went red. He told me I could leave, and I hauled ass out of there. From my little cubicle, I wasn't close enough to hear the full chewing out my boss got, but I heard the details through the grapevine over the next few days, about how the partners were seriously pissed that my boss had wasted over 100 hours of a junior's time on a useless task that was obviously a prank, and how had my boss not realized that he was being pranked? Was he an idiot? I wasn't blamed at all, of course. I had been working under my boss's close supervision. My boss didn't get fired, but there were some good outcomes for me. For one thing, the partner told me to send him a copy of any memos I wrote for my boss, and that ended him taking credit for my work. My boss also stopped deleting my dockets for my research. Plus, I got a belated Christmas bonus for having to give up on my alleged vacation to write the stupid memo. I really hated working in that place, but whenever times were tough, I'd think back to the case of the forged memo, and that always brought a smile to my face. Story: An Attorney's Dream Case. My Parents versus the Bank. In 1973, my parents had enough money to build a little ranch house in the country. The small bank in town approved the mortgage, and the bank signed a contract to give Bob the money to build the house. Bob, as it turns out, was overbooking himself all over town, leaving his clueless minions to do the actual work. The build took longer and longer, with more and more work having to be ripped out and redone. We're not talking about using the wrong color paint or nailing up some wonky trim here. The architect forgot to fully erase a line on the blueprints, and the framers built a wall through the bathtub. My mother was told don't put anything heavy in the kitchen cabinets, BC. They were attached to the drywall, not the studs. using a few roofing nails through the back of each cabinet. The garage door opening was framed into the living room instead of towards the driveway. And so on. When the bank's representative showed up for the final inspection, my parents met him in the front yard and refused to sign off on Bob's work. Then representative became angry, as the bank had paid Bob a lot of money. He strode to the front door and pulled on the doorknob, whereupon the entire door, casing included, fell on him. It had simply been wedged, not nailed, into place. The bank called Bob, who finally showed up to supervise the work himself. The only problem was that Bob wasn't any better at building a house than his minions were. My parents still refused to sign off on the house. My mother was a somm in a nasty rental with 2 tiny children while my dad was working 2 jobs while this was going on. Throughout the entire process, the bank and Bob treated them very poorly, bullying my mom and lying to my dad. What should have been an exciting time for my parents was ruined. My mom cried a lot. My dad got depressed. Finally, the bank threatened my parents with foreclosure and Bob threatened to sue my parents for breach of contract. The bank refused to pay him any more money. So my exhausted parents went to an attorney and gave him the rundown. Plumbing, electrical, tiling issues, the whole sorry mess. My parents were scared. All they had was their small down payment savings, so if this became a lengthy court battle, the bank and Bob would win. The attorney, Tom, was kind, but my dad said he could tell that he and Mom were doomed from Tom's facial expressions as he sorted through the paperwork. Then, abruptly, Tom smiled. "Let's get everyone together for a meeting," he told my parents. "Tomorrow." So my parents, Tom, the bank's representative, the bank's attorney, Bob, and Bob's attorney met at the bank. Tom didn't give anyone else time to begin. He said, "Well, my clients had decided that they no longer want this house. Please remove it." Everyone else started to laugh. "Remove it? Have you lost your mind?" Tom, in a sweeping, theatrical gesture, placed a deed on the table. "My clients own the land the house is sitting on outright. They no longer want the house. Get the house off my client's land." Bob's attorney stared at the deed, and then turned and stared at Bob. "You built a house on land you don't own?" Bob nodded. The bank's attorney started yelling at the bank's representative. "You didn't finance the land the house is on?" The representative stammered, No." Tom said firmly, "As I said, gentlemen, you're trespassing on my client's land. I expect the house to be removed and the land returned to its original state, at once." My dad said he'll remember the blank looks everyone on the other side of the table passed to one another for his whole life. Sure, the bank could foreclose on a house that wouldn't exist by the end of the week, with no way to recoup the money. They didn't even own the land it was on. Bob was out the 50% he'd paid out of pocket, plus he was on the hook for tearing down the house and removing it. On top of that, the bank would undoubtedly want him to repay the initial 50% they'd given him. Could they have gone after my parents? Sure. A foreclosure would have meant bad credit for my parents moving forward. They might lose their down payment. But to sign off on the house in its condition at that time would have meant thousands and thousands of dollars in cash to replace/repair everything from the roof to the basement before the house could be safely lived in. The bank knew my parents didn't have that kind of money. They're the ones who approved the mortgage. Suddenly, my parents were good people. It was all such a misunderstanding, and the bank and Bob couldn't do enough for them. The house was brought in line with the original blueprints and specifications immediately, at no extra cost to my parents, but at considerable cost to Bob. My parents signed the mortgage. Bob got the rest of his money, and just about broke even on the build. The bank's representative was fired. And Tom, attorney extraordinaire, got a stinging tale of triumph to recall to fellow attorneys for the rest of his life. Asterisk before you question this tale, please remember that 1973 was 50 years ago. Banks did things differently back then. Smaller rural banks, in particular, were not run the same way the bigger, city banks were. There were far fewer federal regulations, and in a smaller community people didn't always follow them anyway. I'm pretty sure they don't always follow them now. Asterisk yes, they built a wall through the bathtub. No, I'm not making that up. I even left out how a plumber left his lunch bag on a partially built kitchen cabinet, but the cabinetmaker didn't feel it was his job to move the bag, so he left it there and built the rest of the cabinet around it. I don't know where Bob found these people, but they were gems, every one of them. Bye and see you again in the next videos and stories.